My name is Sterling Hanenkamp. The last name is phonetic, so it's not hard. I work for Bizawi. Woo! Woo! Yeah. Everyone says we're hiring. We're not. We're not hiring, Rich. Now I'm going to give a talk today on inversion of control, and I timed this when I was working on it last night, and I can probably talk to you guys for about 150 minutes. So we're going to see how fast we can get through this, and if I can actually get far enough through the demo app to be useful. If not, as your homework, you need to go home, look at the demo app, run the demo app, and ask me your questions tomorrow. The subtitle of this are How Not to Rewrite Your Entire Application with Every Minor Refactor. Well, I sent a note to some of my friends who might be watching on the camera back home that I was doing a talk on inversion of control, and one of them cleverly replied, "Is that what happens when you let your children take over your house?" And actually, I thought that was an apt analogy. It's actually the opposite of that. So the reason it's called inversion of control is I have no idea. But really, it's kind of setting the house back to rights. The king is in control, and all the peasants listen when you set this up right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story of my life in this talk. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is writing frameworks in my spare time. You know, I've written I don't know how many CMSs. Like, I figured out at one point in my marriage that I had been trying to write a CMS by myself for fun for the entire duration of my marriage as a hobby. And I couldn't figure out why, because I really didn't have any need for one. But, okay, so I'm going to stop there. The gist is that after a while you figure out that, and everyone's figured this out, is that you never finish what you're working on. You never ever finish what you're working on. Every time you think you're done, you get another change request, or somebody wants to, use it doing something else, and you always have to change it again. And half the time you use all these standard tools to change it, but you still find that you're, going through this horrible, horrible process. So what do? We use a bunch of these computer science terms to build code the right way. And okay, great, that's the nice computer science freshman for junior, senior graduate answer thing. But you always end up doing something like this. So you write your code, you've got this huge application that you've built for your company, big corp, and in it you have this reporting framework, and you run this new, and inside the ... the thing that I left out was the 50 lines of configuration you do for every different report you have. And so every report calls this piece of code to throw some standard report up. Okay, that's nice and all, but then at some point somebody says, okay, well, our reporting infrastructure is taking too many CPU cycles on the main machine. We just like to move that off to a different node, and we're going to use RPC or something to communicate between them. So that machine over there is going to start running the reports and dumping them back to us, and we can sleep while that report's running or something. Okay, so now I have 200 screens where I have to make this stupid change. But it's not just this change, because all the contents of that ... now are things like, now I need to know what host I'm contacting. I'm not handing it tables anymore. I may be handling it some configuration abstraction that we've added in the process. Whatever has changed. Now I have to make this change across all of the reports. And it's really annoying. Like, really annoying that I have to change it all these places. So I say the better way is to do something more like this. That's actually easier to see without that there. Okay. Is if you had at the start had some way of passing the report in, and then whatever thing creates your screen objects knows to pass that report in. then you never have to change it here. You could change it, you know, in your configuration where it actually makes sense. You don't have to search through your 200 files. You can go through your 200 configuration files, I guess. But it's really annoying to have to go through code and find these spots, whereas if you put it all into some configuration file that was kind of centralized, it's much easier to find, much easier to know what to do, which reports have to change, etc. And I say that's the amazing way to do it. Okay, so what does it do? Inversion of control is basically a set of tools that help you manage your configuration. It initializes your objects, and it manages the object lifecycle. So when the object has to be created and when it has to go away. It creates the objects whenever it's needed, and then it can also manage the complex relationships that always exist between objects, which is also called dependency injection, which is why the other thing I could have titled this talk is dependency injection frameworks, because they tend to be used interchangeably. And maybe that would have been a better title. What? Oh yeah. That's fine. My phone rang right here, so.
Oh yeah, that was your phone.
That was my phone.
Yeah, you're a little annoying, right?
It is really annoying, isn't it? That it says I'm so happy. So.
I was going to say, if you called it what other thing we just suggested calling it something about dependency injection framework would have the whole plot of Java.
Yeah, well, actually, most of these ideas come from Java. Don't tell anyone. So, what we're going to do in this talk is I'm going to talk about the 4 parts, as I see them, of an inversion of control framework in context of a framework I'm writing. And then I'm going to walk through a trivial accounting application and showing the framework I'm writing. And my disclaimer is I'm a computer scientist, so I get to make up words, so get over it. So what does IOC framework do? So I say it does these 4 things, okay? Compile time, it does 2 things. Configuration, assembly. Configuration is sort of the configuration I hand it. Assembly is the configuration it sort of guesses. So that's just the way the words I use. And then the second steps are when you actually need resources, you do acquisition and resolution. Acquisition is, finding the configuration for that object, and then resolution is turning that configuration into an object somehow. So, starting with the first step, configuration. Configuration is, obviously, if you're building a framework that gives you objects that are configured, you're going to have to store configuration in the system somehow. So here's an example from Breadboard, which is an existing IOC framework. But I'm not going to do that, actually. So, Bolts, my framework. So Bolts is, it's on CPAN now. I think it's had 3 releases. It's not very good. It's still very, has a lot of things that might shift around a little bit, so I wouldn't recommend using it in something mission critical at this point. But it's relatively stable. I don't have a lot of plans to change it or anything. A lot of things, it's really rough around the edges, so you'll try to do something and it gets really ugly really fast. And this actual screen has a bug in it that I'll get to later. But so here is configuration in Bolts. So this my app package is what I call a bag, and a bag contains artifacts. And this bag contains 2 artifacts, one named DSN and one named dbcon. dbcon here is an object that will instantiate a DivX connector object using the new constructor method. And it will pass 3 parameters, except that's actually not the correct way to put undef in there. But you'll see that dep in there is a little helpful way of saying I depend on for this parameter DSN. So it will actually take that other artifact there and inject it into that spot automatically. Now, that's a really simple example, but what you can do, say DSN was some sort of other object that had to be constructed. It would construct that object when it was needed, is what it comes down to. So you can do more complicated things, which we'll get into than this. But this is just a really simple intro to the the configuration aspect of what's going on. Oh, and also when you put in this class, you notice I don't have use DivX connector at the top because part of the framework is it loads things when you ask for them. So it will check to see if that module is loaded and loaded when you ask for it. So assembly, there's a lot of things you can learn from Perl modules that are implemented in things like Moose. So it's kind of nice not to have to say, here's all the configuration I need for this object. Just to say, okay, I want to build one of these. Now you tell me what it needs. Or even better, here's what it needs. Now go find the things you need. You can have it in simple cases. Just go out and grab all the configuration needed to construct an object. So here's another example. In this case, I'm not having to go out and find the configuration automatically. What I'm doing here is I'm defining a person class, which is real complicated. And it has just a name attribute. And now I can say in my configuration for person, I want you to infer what the structure of it is. And the options there says, I want you to make those parameters I pass in, which we'll get to again. There's a lot of pieces here that I have to cover before I can show you how it all fits together. But the idea here is now I can request a person and give it a name, and it will create the object for me the right way for a Moose object. I can only do this for Moose objects at this point that default. Okay, so now we move on to acquisition. Acquisition is you give it a name, it says, okay, that's the configuration you have, I'll construct an object and give it to you. And then in the end, it always pretty much ends in resolution. So here, going back to that first bag, my app, we construct the bag using new. A bag is just a regular object. And then we acquire that dbcon that we were looking at. And then we can run, if you know how DivX connector works, there's a run method on it that lets you execute some SQL, and it makes sure that the connection actually exists, and will restart the connection if it dies. So that's the first acquisition and resolution. And then the second one is showing off something that Boltz does, which is Boltz doesn't actually have a special container class like Breadboard or a lot of other IOC frameworks does. It will treat any object, any hash, or any array as just a fine container, and will reach into it and grab whatever out of it. So it treats this dbh method on dbcon as an artifact that can be resolved out of a bag, and it just treats that object as a bag and does it. So you can do these kinds of chain method calls. I mean, it would be just as easy to say acquire dbcon close parenthesis arrow dbh, but this is just demonstrating it does not treat any kind of object special.
Or is there better error handling when you do it that way?
Probably not yet.
Okay.
Error handling is one of those things that it's real ugly right now. In fact, some of the error handling is basically it spews like 10 pages of complete gibberish at this point. So, yeah, it's not very, very nice to have. It needs to do what the problem is, and this is the problem with any kind of configuration thing, it doesn't do enough checking at the start, so it doesn't tell you when something went terribly wrong right when you loaded the configuration. And I need to add more checking on that end of things, so that when you get into it, it does this error that you can't even tell where it came from because it was something that happened in the configuration, not in the actual code itself. Okay, so resolution is kind of this two-pronged thing where you either construct an object or you have a cache hit. And so this is kind of another aspect of the power of one of these frameworks is that it keeps track of the objects that are already alive for you. So if you have a singleton that you just need for the whole lifetime of your application, this will keep track of that for you. Or if you need an object that exists only for the duration of a web request, it can do that too. So here is a quick example of that. So you see there's same definitions we've seen before already actually, but this time I added scope to each one of those. And you can also see I fixed the parameters this time. You have to do this ugly value thing on parameters like that. But anyway, scope on that dbcon now is singleton, which means that we will fetch that object the first time, and then for as long as that app object there exists, it will continue to fetch the same dbcon. In the second case, it's prototype, which says we never ever cache it. We just run it, create a new one every time. Again, singleton here, just to clarify, is not like singleton for the process. It's singleton for the duration of that bag. So if you kill that, if that bag goes out of scope, that app, $app goes out of scope, and we create a new one, we'll get a new dbcon, which is kind of a nice thing if you think about it, because then you could have bags that exist for a certain period of time and they just go away, and then we get a new singleton. So that's sort of a cheap way of creating a limited scope on your containers. Okay, so let's break down resolution into its little parts. So Bolts has this thing called a blueprint. A blueprint is an object that describes how to create objects. So there's some examples. You could have one that calls a factory method like new, or any method on a string class object. You could have a builder method, or really a builder subroutine where you just pass in whatever you want to do, and that could return an object, that could return a hash, that could return anything. You could return a string that you generate. Acquisition, which is you take another bag and you pull something out, or it can be used as pulling something out of the current bag. So you could use it as a way of aliasing your configuration. And then you can have it do literal values. And eventually, I haven't written this part yet, but eventually you should be able to say, here's my YAML file, just pull that in and use that as the configuration. A lot of, here's where I differ, and I'm not ashamed about pulling in Java. The thing I won't do is I will not do what Java does and insist that the configuration be stored in something horrible like XML. So here's an example of 4 different blueprints. The first one's using calling the connect method on DivX connector via DBH. The second one is just doing a subroutine. The third one is an alias to the second one, and then the fourth one is a literal, which would be a really probably silly way to do it, because you're basically saying run that when I compile my app the first time, and then every my app object is just going to return one of those, which is probably not really what you want. But I suppose if you're in a hurry. So part of the blueprint process is there's 2 aspects to that you can break it into further. Well, it's not further. Injection is another layer that happens either before or after or both. Injection says I can modify how it's constructed. So when I've had those parameter lines in there, I've said I want to pass in a certain number of parameters to the constructor. So you can do that. Or you can have post-construction, where you might do things like call setter methods on the object. So you want to make some changes to the object after it's created. Or store injection, you could push keys into a hash or push values or set indexes on an array. The latter is mostly intended for use if you can construct a hash on the fly with bolts, which is not very easy, not necessarily the easiest thing to do in some other tools. But you could also use that to finagle the internals of somebody's object if you were really evil. So that's there for you. So here's just some examples of different ways of doing this injection. So the first one, we're passing parameters, and then I'm showing all of this. Is showing the main bolts package is basically just sugar, like mousse. And actually it's using mousse. But if you really need to do something special, there are ways, and it's well beyond what I could go into in this talk. There are ways to actually reach into and mess with all the metadata that's set up on all these objects to do this manually. And almost all of this stuff can be customized in certain ways. But see, these value things are just like creating in-place value parameters, because what injection does is each thing being injected has its own blueprint. So all of those are also blueprints that tell it how to construct. So the first one is parameters. It's passing those parameters to the constructor. The second one uses some parameters, and one of them has to be passed as an option. So when I showed you that infer line earlier for the assembly process, this is actually what it would, that first parameters line there is actually what it would do, is it would generate an option that had to be passed in for acquisition. And then it calls a setter named favorite color and sets it to the value green, which is my favorite color. Then the last two are modifying a hash and array. I honestly can't remember which order push and indexes happens in. It obviously has to happen in a certain order, but I don't remember which. And actually, it might not even be defined. So just so you know, don't do both of those on one call. Okay, so the final aspect of resolution is scope. So scope is what caches the value, determines the life cycle. The two built-in scopes are prototype, no caching, singleton, always caching, as long as that parent container lives. And you could add any kind of custom scope. You know, you could have it for a login session, you could have it per web request, you could have it serialized somehow. I mean, you can, any kind of scoping mechanism you could think of that would be useful in an application, you could make one for. But these are just the two, like, most obvious. So, I'm going to give a demo. It's not going to be run in a terminal like some people do. I've had problems with that in the past. So, this demo is about this application called Cliac. Cliac. The reason I wrote Cliac is because all accounting programs suck, right? And MoonPay sucks too, sorry.
Check if you're paying attention.
This one totally doesn't. Let's write one that works on the command line, okay? Because surely it won't suck that way. And nobody's thought of doing it, so I have a patent pending. If you want, the code is here, github.com/sosday/Cliac. It's a really good idea. So just real quick, if you don't know how accounting works, you basically have two columns in, well, good accounting. You have two columns, which I call left and right. And when you sum them up, they both equal the same number, okay? And you can have different kinds of accounts that hold some of those columns. So you could have, your bank account has the left, and your income account from your whoever pays you on the right, as long as they match. And then what you do is, on your accounts, you say, left accounts treat the left column as the positive number, and right accounts treat the right side as positive. And I have those totally backwards for you guys, which is funny because I never get them right when I'm thinking about it. Okay, this is really fun. Okay, it's fun. And the reason I'm thinking about this is I do this a lot at work. Accounting is a big part of what we do. It's very fun. My boss gets excited about inventories, so. Okay, so here's just a quick look at the schema we're going to use. How much time do we use today? Oh, we're doing great. So here is the schema. So just to break it down for you, you have two sets of books. You can have two sets of books. You find that accountants actually, even though they have standard practices, none of them do it the same way. You can have two sets of books. One's the general ledger, which sort of says this is all the connective things between all the accounts. So you can have your sort of all the details for all the accounts in your general ledger. And then you can have account ledgers, which are like, this is just the ledger lines for the bank account. This is just ledger lines for, wow, can't believe we're at this point halfway. We might get through this anyway. And then half, sorry, got lost. Account ledger will hold just the information for one particular kind of account. So, you might have an expense account that says, these are all the things we, bought on office supplies. And we have a, income account, these are all the things that Bob paid us. And so how this breaks down is the lines sort of acts in this scenario as the general ledger. It's the thing that connects everything. And so if you see down here this, and I don't have any foreign keys here to help clarify what's going on because this is all SQLite. But the ledger line there in entries points back to lines. And then account down here points to the account. So every line belongs to an account, and then every group of lines is in a general ledger. Okay? Clear as mud. So we'll go ahead and I'll show you guys what it would look like on the command line. So here, init will create the database for us. Account create, so we're going to create a left account named checking for our bank. Then we'll look at the balance. The balance starts out at 0, makes sense. Then we'll create Fancy Corp, our employer, as a right account. And then the balance starts there, of course, at 0. And then we'll post a line. So our post program is real dumb at this point. It only creates 2 accounting ledger lines. And you say D is the description, so that's paycheck. So I'm getting a paycheck. It's being delivered to the left checking account, and on the right line is going to be Fancy Corp, and the amount is $100. There you go, $100. That's my general ledger line right there. So you can see there on the left we have checking, and on the right we have Fancy Corp. They both have the description of paycheck. Okay, and then just looking at each account ledger. So looking at the checking account ledger, we can see that we pulled from Fancy Corp $100, and our balance is now $100. And if we look at the Fancy Corp account ledger, we have checking got $100 from our paycheck, and the total they paid us is $100. So every time we add, if we posted a paycheck every month, we can see all the $100 paychecks we got. Real complicated, real simple. Got it? Tried to keep this as simple as I could so I wouldn't have to waste a lot of time writing this thing. I mean, it's awesome. I really wanted to write this. Okay, so now let's change what we're doing and look at code. So I'm gonna stick with. You guys probably can't see that. Okay. So I'm just gonna stick with sort of giving you a few of the classes. There's really no way I could go through all of it. So this is the posting script. So this is a little script, that Kayak post that we ran. And you can see that in it we have defined 2 services, one for accounts and one for ledgers. And then we parse our command line. And then we have this initialization. So you can see here I've done it the dumb way to start. I've done it the way I said you shouldn't do it. So this is more like a proof of concept than anything else. So we create this thing which gets us access to the database, which we pass through. This is mostly just a wrapper around DivX connector. And then we have our 2 services, accounts and ledgers. And then we get the account by name, so the left account they gave us, the right account they gave us. We find the amount, the pennies, because we do all our math in pennies because it's easy.
Should really be using floats there,
No.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
What do you say your actual pennies?
Well, when somebody invents a currency that has thousands, then we're kind of in trouble.
There have been such currencies. I think at least one is still current, actually.
Is there? I looked recently, I didn't see one. But honestly, if I was really serious about this, I probably wouldn't care that much. I might actually use floats and just do lots and lots and lots around it. Okay, so we get our pennies, and then we tell, we create this model. So I'm not really going to go into these, but these are like abstractions that just contain this information. Really, the model classes don't do anything except they're just like really simple things for containing these values. And I wrote them primarily just to make sure that I didn't make some stupid mistake. And then we call the ledgers create ledger, which gets a left line and a right line. This method actually is smart enough that I could give it several left lines and several right lines, and it would do the right thing, but the script is too dumb to do that. Yeah?
Going back up to the top in your GitOps, I don't use GitOps very often, but isn't it bad that we have two R's?
Oh yeah, that's bad.
Oh.
I'm surprised I haven't run into that yet.
So it must take the ladder. Otherwise you misbehave.
Yeah, it must take the ladder, or else it would be bad. You're right. Every non-trivial program has at least one bug. And even trivial programs often have more than one, especially if I write. Okay, so that's like dead simple. That's not rocket science. None of this should be rocket science. It's accounting. I mean, come on. How hard could it be? You'd be surprised. Especially when your bookkeeper has no idea what you're doing. Or he. I promise I'm not thinking of anyone specific. Okay, so here is, now, okay, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Okay, okay, so we had this script over here. This was a proof of concept. This was not doing it the way I said with IOC. Because if I was doing it with IOC, then I would not create these things inside the class. I would not be configuring database connections or sending root things. Well, I might be sending root things actually, because finding the root directory is hard. Somebody should really figure out a way to do that. That's not like insane. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do this the right way. So the first thing we do is we're going to create this bag here named client. And it does take a root beer. So in the way this configuration works, you can define an artifact in your bag that has nothing after it, so this has no definition. This is essentially the same as an attribute. I mean, it's not actually implemented as an attribute. It's more complicated than that, but I've thought about just making it an attribute. So this is just really kind of a synonym for that. And then we create, oops, thanks, don't do that. Go away. Go away. Thank you. So then we have this DB artifact, which will create our DB class, and it requires a root directory to get started, and we only need one of those. And then we create, we have this bag. This is a nested bag, a bag within a bag, just for organization's sake. And we have the services in here, and we name them service account and service ledger, just like we did in the script, and those have a dependency. Those depend on the DB. And this dep here will actually reach out of the bag it's nested in to grab this one from its greater context, which uses special things that are related to the sugar, but I'm not telling you this. I'm not sure I like it. Anyway, so this is our bag. That's it. That's not complicated. It's not really a complicated app. So what does that do to our scripts? Let's take a look. So first of all, we can get rid of. We don't need to load these anymore. We can just load this in the scripts. And then we can replace that initialization code at the top in each one. So we had to build the service. Let's go down to the one we actually looked at. Account host. Oh, that's a test. Is that it? No, host. It's not account host. Okay, there we go. So, I should stop trying to give myself a cricket on the next screen in front of me. Okay, so here you can see before we did this, we had the DB, the service account, the service ledger, and now we're replacing with just Kayak. And then we still have to have those 3 lines, but now instead of defining them as specific objects, we just acquire the service accounts and the service ledgers here, and everything else works the same. So it's not really a complicated thing to implement. And it's basically the same change in all of our files. But we don't really want to make this change every time we do something. Well, now things get complicated. We're going to do that same RPC thing I mentioned before. So let's make a server that does accounting so that now we can use our mobile app as well as our command line tool. And okay, no, did I? Yes, I did. Okay, so we create a server. So this looks almost exactly the same as what we just looked at. So, so I implemented this as a step. If you actually look at, actually I'll just give you jump out to here. If you look in here, I tagged the different steps, and these are out of order, of course. The first step I showed you was the proof of concept, so that's just sort of like, here's the basic application. And then I converted to use services. No, I converted to use IOC. No, what did I do? No, proof of concept was actually, this is a step I didn't show you. And then I use services, and then I extract. Never want to do. All right, okay. Sorry about this, I should have thought about this ahead of time. So IOC conversion is what I already showed you. IOC conversion is the point where I've already broken it. No. Extract interfaces. Maybe that's one. In any case, this has all the steps. You can look at the timestamps on the tags to figure out what order it is. I'm not going to waste time. So, so here I'm going to say, okay, now I need a server that does it. So I'm going to write a little server. So it needs its own IOC container. And this looks really similar. Ignore the model thing because that doesn't work. So it does exactly what we did before for the command line, but it has these new things. It has a new controller thing, which these are just sort of like helpers to help us along. And then we write, I should go, okay, so it's written using 0MQ to do all of the work. So basically, you have this thing that waits for a message to come in. The message tells it which service to run, which method on the service to call, calls it, gets a response, and sends back the response as a hash, which then gets sent back, and we do all the communication with JSON. It's really dead simple, and those controllers are what we're actually calling. So these services here are actually the controller objects. Okay, so they're just really wrappers around the DB classes that do some extra, like, make sure we don't do anything stupid with our input. So that is server. So the problem now is, okay, so now I want my client to talk to, I want my client to talk to that server now. And I did not do this one. Here, and look at this. Okay, so my command line tool now has these things, MQ, MQ. So this is exactly the same as before, except I changed my config here so that they use this. Now the MQ makes calls out to the RPC server to run everything, which runs things on the DB. Okay, so I've totally changed the way the CLI app works, right? So the question then is, did I change the scripts? Like, did I have to change a bunch of scripts? And if you look through here, I'm scrolling through really fast, you're seeing a lot of new code that implements MQ handling, and you're seeing lots of code doing the controllers and adding the servers. But what you won't find here is that anything in the bin directory changed. And that's where we end up saving a bunch of work. Because I don't have to hunt through all those script files and find the things. Now, what this doesn't save you is if your interface changes. So you add a new method to your services, you still have to go and, or you change the way one of the methods works because you found a security flaw in your protocol or something, you still have to go through and change all your methods. But that to me is kind of like the best justification for it. I really like being able to put my application into neat little boxes where when I need to make a change to, to all the reports, I don't want to have to hunt through 200 files that are in totally different places to find the 200 reports I want to change. I want to look in one place. I want to know that all my reporting configuration is going to be found in one place, and I don't have to worry about, did I miss one because we constructed funny in one place, or did I get all of the arguments changed right? I can just sort of look in one place. So you could say that I'm just like moving around where I'm fixing my problems, but I think in many ways this is much more elegant because you just sort of, you have that separation of concerns more than I think you have when your application knows where to look for everything. The other thing it does, we haven't gotten into, is that you can implement service locators. So where when you acquire something, it's actually not getting you a local object. It's going, oh, this is some remote service, and I need to grab it from somewhere else. Anyway, that's pretty much. I got done early. Jane.
Yeah, there you go.
Firefly.
Jane for Firefly.
So, questions?
Are your slides online somewhere?
Yeah, they're linked from if you go to the talk on the schedule.
So the interesting thing about how you're doing the dependencies and effectively the attributes is you're fixing the Moose lazy problem.
In a way, yeah. It addresses almost the same issue. There's one reason I kind of like breadboard declare does this, where you can sort of mix breadboard and Moose into the same thing, and I almost kind of feel like, why? Moose already does that sort of. And so it never quite got it. It stuck with me. There are other things about the way breadboard does things that led me to do some of this. Like for example, in some ways it makes it really hard to go and say, I want to load some configuration file that has this huge tree of configuration options, and I want to grab a nested option. So that's why you can reach into anything as a configuration object. So I can say, I need, prod database config, some DSN or something like that to get deep into a hash to grab configuration out of it. Breadboard, you kind of have to like shim it in somehow with extra code, and I just never felt quite finished to me for that reason. I don't know that. And I really like doing stuff myself on those things. One thing that I would like to be able to do is figure out a way to say that it's lazy, but I want to load it ahead of time for some reason. I don't have any way of doing that right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Are your singletons lazy loaded, or are they?
Yeah, everything is lazy loaded. So if you need something, it's loaded right there. So I guess the easy solution at this point would be to say, create the object and then request the things and throw away the references if you need them loaded ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you pointed out that you get a lot of benefit here when you're changing how the innards of some system implemented with inversion control work. But if the outside interface changes, you have to do some more work sometimes.
Yeah.
So would you suggest starting with inversion control and developing a new app, or converting once you've got like a definite API in place?
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer, to be honest. Usually what happens is your application starts out as some weird prototype anyway that some guy wrote over a weekend to demo for the new client, and now you've got to convert it into something real. And so in that case, he's probably not going to go through any extra overhead whatsoever to build the app. So I guess realistically, you're always going to be converting something. The thing that I want to solve and may not have a solution for is that interface problem. How do you create an interface that can change? And I've seen it done a few different ways, like Microsoft's COM tries to be really clever about it, and it's almost too clever. It's like blindingly evil in some ways. Because like DirectX, I remember programming DirectX, and you'd say, I want to get a DirectX 9 object. Okay, so I request a DirectX 3 object, which has an interface that lets me get a DirectX 5 object, which has an interface that lets me get a DirectX 7 object, which lets me get the DirectX 9 object. So you have to reach through the objects, because they all have, and DirectX 9 had, the hooks already built into the interface to get to the DirectX 11 object that doesn't exist yet. It was a stub. So if you request the DirectX 11 object, it would just like die on you, and then you just had to deal with whichever object you had from there. Android has some really semi-clever, semi-evil things of that nature too, where you can sort of say, in this version of Android OS, I want to do this, but in this version of Android OS, I want to do this. And I don't know that there's a really good general purpose answer. Within an application, who cares, right? Because you're just going to go through and rewrite all of your code. But if you're in a library, you kind of do care. You could just say, don't ever upgrade anymore, since you're depending on some old version, which is what most of us do. Or we go and create evil patches to the software to make it so we can. But I don't know if there's a good solution. I would love to find one to that problem. Anybody else? All that good? All right. Thanks.
So a quick reminder, if you're going over to the social event tonight, you plan on taking the tea, you're going to need 4 singles and 4 quarters. Autumn has the cash box right out there, so you can make change if you need change. We'll be meeting at the lobby, in the lobby at 6 p.m. What's that? Okay. You can do whatever you want. It's just for the people that don't know how to get there.
Of all the non-divided into 100.
Oh, okay. I got you.